continues. And the opening point here I wanted to get into was this Israeli biolab. Now, this is an important story to briefly go over again. Actually, the LA Times story we're going to reference, or Los Angeles Times, does a good job kind of overviewing the original parts too. And I'll include anything that I think you need to know. Now, this is what caught my eye is DropSite News reporting this, and then cites the article here. And it says, an Israeli citizen was arrested in Las Vegas after police found a cache of weapons, lab equipment, and more than 1,000 samples of unknown liquids at a home tied to the widening biosecurity investigation, Los Angeles Times reports. Now, this is all what we were already reporting, including the fact that the Chinese national was the one that was involved. Now, I'll give you my thoughts on what this played out as and what happened last time and what's happening right now. So let's read the article. So this is coming from yesterday. Now, Code Enforcement Officer Jesslyn Harper discovered a clandestine biolab in Reedley, California. This is what we reported on. Here's the actual article from February 7th. Israeli citizen charged in the Las Vegas biolab case as Fort Detrick investigates sabotage. Just same time frame. Now, what's interesting is at this time, I was interesting to find out whether there was connection to the other conversations. And I think either after the show or in this show, we realized that was the case. And it's connected to the same the story we covered back in about the stucco wall with like the hose sticking out of the side of the building. And the whole conversation was, well, how does that possibly make sense? Because, well, they had freezers, right, and coolers, right? So clearly they had electricity. So somebody in the city knew they were using electricity, but we're supposed to be told it was a building nobody knew was being used with a hose sticking out of the side of the building. There's no way it was viable. It didn't believable. It just didn't line up for me. Somebody somewhere knew that building was doing what it was doing or doing something off the, not off the grid, but outside the law, if you will. And that's not what happened. It just kind of got dropped in the Chinese guy. Okay. And then we have this other story that came up, and it turns out they're interconnected. And it turns out the connection, guys, is that Ori Solomon owns the buildings. So at this point, you have to stand back and go, okay, is it possible these Chinese individuals were using his buildings and they just used two separate buildings? It's possible. Yeah. But it's also just as possible that this is whatever this all is being facilitated by this Israeli man. Now, does that mean it's tied to the Israeli government? No, not necessarily. And we went over last time the potential connections and so on. The point for me is just the interesting way this story was covered and why and how this is incredibly important, and yet it just seems to have gotten dropped when the deeper story became noticed. Now, it says the facility was allegedly operated by a Chinese national involved in smuggling counterfeit COVID tests. Also interesting time and connection, right? That this was during that time frame where fake COVID tests and some of them were fake pregnancy tests were being sold to Americans. So, the time frame was very much this. The Wuhan. Trump basically directed everyone to aim everything at China, despite the evidence, by the way, and the reality of the evidence clearly suggests if it was what he was saying, then they're clearly both involved. But there's more to the story. I'm not going to go down that discussion today. We covered it all extensively. In fact, we were some of the earliest people talking about that potential, despite the fact that I think the evidence went a very different direction. And that's funny why you have the government and a lot of the mainstream alternatives swinging back around and going, biolab, and that's the way they created a lab in Wuhan way after the fact when that was what we were doing the day that started. Worth going back through all that, by the way, the whole story. But to this point, the Chinese national who was involved with the actual building, not the ownership, but the actual operation, so we're told, was involved with the COVID overlap. So this could be China doing something. It could be random Chinese people doing this for their own interest. And it could be this Israeli running it all. And it also could be, just like the same point you can consider of China, it could be Israeli government operating this and manipulating through this same channel. So let's go through this and consider that for yourself. The case of a lifetime started with a putrid smell and a green garden hose sticking out of the side of a supposedly vacant warehouse in California farm country. Labels such as malaria, COVID-19, and HIV, labels that read blood and Ebola. Now, remember this original story. Last I checked, no one has ever gotten definitive information about what they actually had. There was statements about what they said and then going to the lab. And last time I checked into it, there was nothing on it. Not that I can find right now. The idea being, why would we not find out what that was? Seems pretty weird, doesn't it? Then went on, her discovery blew open an elaborate criminal case with ties to California, Las Vegas, and China. In the sense of the people, the investigation in Reedley found that the lab was part of an elaborate scheme to import COVID tests from China and pass them off as American-made. But there are some who fear the operation was much more complex than that. A congressional committee uncovered payments topping $1 million made to an operator of a Reedley business from banks in the People's Republic of China. Now, understand, what we're talking about is banks that exist in that country, not necessarily the government. The way that people in this country, especially partisans, love to frame things like that in Russia and China is that there's no world in which anything that exists there cannot be controlled by the government. And that's not an unfair consideration, especially when the same kind of points should be made about where we live. But that's not usually how that goes. But just like where we live, that's not the case ubiquitously. And so it's the same thing there. But so consider that all we're really talking about is money from a bank that came from China. So if you were hypothetically wanting to create an operation and make it not look like it was you, which is what every intelligence anywhere would do, whether CIA or, MI6 or Mossad, then you would, and China is an easy low-hanging fruit when it comes to COVID-19 conversation. But it could be China too. That's just as much a consideration in this conversation, especially since the two we know, the nationalities were Chinese and Israeli. And we're getting to that next. The defendant in the case, Jia, I think it's Bai Zhu, a Chinese national, has not been charged with running an illicit biolab. How is that possible? How can you have this go? So it's not like there wasn't a lab. That's everybody can see that. They took the materials. Now, even if you want to claim they just had a bunch of random things labeled like that, you told us that the building was not allowed to be used or supposed to be unoccupied. So how is this guy not charged with a crime? The vials discovered in the Reedley were never tested. Now, again, this is what that's what she's claiming. I found the same. I find that hard to believe. I don't know how, my point, that's why I said it earlier, I think they very much did test these things and we're just not being told. Seems kind of strange. Like just the sense that you would argue that if they were never tested, in what world does that make sense? So you're telling me you guys scooped up a bunch of potential Ebola and COVID and whatever else you claim is there and you just didn't do anything? You didn't test it? You just did what? Put it in a bag, put it in a cabinet, threw it in the garbage? None of that makes any sense whatsoever for the potential that it could be a very dangerous thing if you believe that's possible. But yeah, they never tested it. Either they told us that or they didn't because there was actually nothing to, it was something like that. Very strange. But for some officials, the questions left unanswered from the lab in Reedley, then Nevada, two separate locations, underscores America's vulnerability to unregulated biohazards that could be used by bad actors for criminal behavior and even terrorism. Now, because this was the one from Las Vegas. Remember, these connect to the same person we're about to get to. Now it says, and again, before we move past that, think about this, where we're being screamed at by our own government, left and right, about all of this, about domestic terrorism, about bioterrorism, and then yet we have this example, and then just nothing happens, no hype about it, no concern, no testing. I don't buy it. Quote, at worst, this investigation revealed significant gaps in our nation's defenses and pathogen-related regulations that present a grave national security risk that could be exploited in the future. Now, there is an opening for consideration that the entire thing was just a set-up narrative to point back to when some kind of thing gets rolled out. And whether that's not to say we're saying that as an absolute. And again, if you're out there considering or thinking that it's crazy conspiracy theory to consider that a government might conduct some kind of an operation to manipulate, then you just do not simply know how the world works and are not paying attention over the last 30 seconds, it seems, let alone the last year. But understand that it's possible that this could be a scenario that's used, even if it was a real situation, to later, argue that there was some kind of stemming point for something different. The Center of Disease, the CDC, it determined that at least 20 potential infectious bacterial and viral agents, including dengue, hepatitis B, C, herpes simplex virus, rubella virus, and SARS coronavirus were present in the warehouse, according to a Fresno County Department of Public Health application for an abatement warrant filed in civil court. Okay, wait a minute. We're being told that no testing was done. And yet the CDC claims they determined what these things were. Okay, well, there's an obvious gap in the story. And it says, and that's where the story of what was found in Reedley warehouse could have ended, except the longer Zhu sat in jail, but never charged with a illegal biolab, the bigger the case became. Now, this is what I find interesting. And this is why I always point out things about like the local investigation that seem to be problematic for the larger kind of engineered things. For example, Derek's investigation around the Utah investigation around sexual abuse of children with the ritualistic sexual abuse. That was a major case put forward by the Utah Sheriff's Department with undeniable evidence. And the point was, that's something that the federal side, which is ultimately what they did, it didn't really go anywhere, always steps on. And it happened because the local sheriff's department saw the evidence. Or, for example, the case in Oregon about the Saudi Arabia conversation, which we've shared many times. The local Oregon sheriff's department was like, look, Saudi Arabian people are coming in the state, raping women, stealing and leaving and being flown back to Saudi Arabia under diplomatic cover. I've covered this many times. Happens to Israel all the time. We just talked about Tom, what was his name? Yeah, I forget now. Something Androvich or something. He was an Israeli, tagged to the government, flew in with the intention to abuse a child sexually. That was the meeting he set up, and then he got caught on a sting, and they let him fly home. He's never been charged. Anyway, the point was the Saudi Arabia thing, it was being very widely discussed. And it's not like it was necessarily being like allowed and organized, but because they're Saudi Arabian and because they're an ally of the United States government and clearly care more about that than your life or your livelihood, they just let them fly home, and it still happens. So, considering that, back to the point, it says, and that's where the story of what was found in Reedley warehouse could have ended. Except it got bigger when I argue the local investigation element started to uncover what Ari Solomon had in his home. Now, it was dark on January 31st when law enforcement descended on a 5-bedroom tract home in northeast Las Vegas that Zhu had listed as collateral for bail and called some 400 times in the past year. Now, that's interesting to me. That's one of the points that stands out is showing that there's more collaboration than maybe Zhu being used. Because one of my thoughts is simply that this is, as we'll get into, he's a criminal, this guy. Apparently he's a millionaire, but he's a criminal, was in Canada, Zhu, the Chinese national, and then moved to Reedley and was there ever since. And I'm wondering if this is sort of an operation where this person was compromised and then brought in to play this role, right? It's worth thinking about. But if that's not the case, then it's more likely that we see them working together. And then the fact that he was calling it some 400 times seems like there's something weird going on there. And then the fact that we're talking about the listed as collateral point means that there's more. It's not just something he's renting, right? Now it says by the end. Oh wait, no, go on. It says they rolled into the 900 block of Sugar Springs Drive in armored vehicles operating drones and a robot dog. Yeah, welcome to the technocratic world. By the end, police had arrested a man named Ari Solomon. So they went into the location based on the Chinese national and the information they had, and they ultimately arrested Ari Solomon, a 55-year-old Israeli citizen who authorities say managed the home, and another that was also searched. While nothing was found in the second home, the search on Sugar Springs Drive proved fruitful, police said at the news conference. Now, investigators found, as we reported last time, a cache of weapons and arrested him on federal weapons charges, saying he was barred from having them due to he was on a non-immigration visa, which I find interestingly relevant to the conversation today. And they also accused him of improperly disposing of hazardous waste. Okay, but wait a minute here. So now we're talking about the fact that in this home, not the lab, the home, this man had not just waste, as we'll get to, but other dangerous things that were in the lab. So I don't think there's any logical way you can disconnect him from what was going on there. I think that clearly shows that. An attorney representing Solomon did not respond for comment. Video from news outlets at the scene also showed investigators spending a great deal of time in the home's garage, where they donned respirators, protective clothing, and removed lab equipment. Okay, see, it's very clear. And more than 1,000 samples of unknown liquid. So this is the same thing. Okay, this is important, I think, to understand that this person is the central tie. The substances were sent to an FBI lab in Maryland for testing, but as far as I can tell, again, we never get to find out. The materials, according to Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Sheriff Kevin McMahill said, were consistent with what was found at Reedley. So what does that mean? Consistent, but you're telling we never get to find out what that was? What's consistent about it? That they're liquid or that they're dangerous Ebola? I guess we'll have to guess. Sue's attorney said that they weren't involved in any kind of biolab, which, those things tend to be, well, that's what he would say, of course, if he was. But it says, what went on in that residence we are unaware of. Weird. Capozzi did not return an email and phone call seeking additional comment from the Times. Capozzi being the Jew's attorney. Now it says nearly a month. So what he was said, that's Jew's attorney saying we're not aware of whatever was going on inside of that residence. Now that's important because this overlap becomes interesting where what we're hearing is that essentially put it for collateral, called it. But whether or not he was aware of the larger point of what was actually happening, it matters, I think. Nearly a month after the search, it is still not clear what was inside the Las Vegas home and what the plan was for the materials. I mean, we've seen these things. Look at these pictures. This is the same stuff that you had all the screen that rightly concerned, but hyperbolic sort of framing from a lot of the, libs of TikTok and all the mainstream alternative MAGA, fake MAGA patriots, who were all up in arms, rightly so, because this was a crazy story. But then funny enough, how they stopped talking about it when they got to this point. Sort of like the man from Azerbaijan who was actually, they claimed was a Palestinian who's going to say, you're going to know my name when I come through the border. And then it turned out he was actually somebody that was tied to Mossad, and that was easily proven. And then they just stopped talking about it. Talked about that many times. I mean, guys, there's no misunderstanding what that is. Now it says, we recognize that the public is seeking clarity. What were they testing for? What possibilities are being considered? Christopher Delzato, special agent in charge of the FBI Las Vegas, said during a February news conference, in cases like this, our process relies on being slow and methodical. And okay, I mean, think about this. So how many months did it possibly take to end up revealing what this was? Capozzi, Zoo's attorney, told reporters outside a federal courtroom in 2023 that the allegation in the congressional report that his client is an agent of the Chinese government is inaccurate. But again, probably what they would say if that was the case. That's the furthest thing from the truth. He wrote, he's applied for asylum here in the United States because of the Chinese government, which is true, but, easily just be a cover, but means it's another point in the other direction that ultimately is trying to apply for asylum to get away from the bad Chinese government is how it's being framed. Zhu then moved to Canada and started doing business there, focusing on the cattle industry. In 2016, one of his businesses was ordered by a Canadian court to pay $330 million for allegedly stealing cattle-related technology from a U.S.-based company. That's this Zhu guy. It is not clear whether the business ever paid the judgment. Okay, that seems a bit odd, isn't it? Wouldn't you be able to find documents to maybe, most likely, but there's situations in which it could be sealed, but that seems very strange to me. So not only is he a multimillionaire who lived in Canada, who got caught stealing cattle-related U.S. technology from a U.S.-based company, and then doesn't seem to have ever flushed out what actually happened there. He was ordered to serve 6 months in jail after being found in contempt of court, a conviction that he appealed. But court records didn't make clear whether he served any time. Now, the House Select Committee reports say that Zhu fled Canada and landed in California. Went to Reedley. And that's where the story continued. So the question becomes, with this background, and let me read this last part, actually. It says, by 2020, federal prosecutors said Zhu and his partner Wang were operating two companies, Universal Meditech Inc. and Prestige Biotech Inc., which we've heard those names, Prestige, that sold COVID-19 pregnancy and other types of test kits. Remember all the money that Trump's administration was just dumping, and Biden, but he started that. We're just dumping the money into the hands of people for COVID tests and for respirators and small companies. I mean, I think the report actually showed that the vast majority of that through the CARES Act, wildly broken. Everybody was abusing them. Honestly, I think it was a way to dump money in the hands of their friends. But a lot of people went through and did it the same and enriched themselves faking things like this because they weren't checking anything. Now, it says Zhu and Wang imported hundreds of thousands of COVID-19 test kits from a Chinese company that they controlled and falsely represented to customers that the test kits were made in the United States, according to their indictment. They illegally imported the COVID test kits disguised as pregnancy tests, which they had been approved to import. Approved to import. Okay, so realize we're talking about a Chinese nationals who are, one of them was a multimillionaire who got caught stealing U.S. technology from a U.S. company, somehow still has enough money to start two new companies, goes to Reedley, California, and then starts all of this. And again, the common thread over all of these 2 points was the Ori Solomon Israeli who owned the building. So what I just think is interesting is that there's so many elements of this. Like I said, even the energy from the building, like there's so many obvious elements that shows you whether it's the U.S. government, Israeli government, or whatever else, that something was aware of this. Some element of authority was allowing and essentially covering this up. That's what I believe, because nothing's happened. And it ties back to COVID, ties back to the same kind of fraud that we were dealing with, and that overall, that nobody's done anything about these people, despite them being caught with fraud, starting fake companies, and the way it started seems to suggest they could have been sort of compromised. or zoo at the very least. Now, the full scope of what is inside the Reedley lab will probably never be known, they write. Why? Why does that make sense? Harper, the code enforcement officer, said the CDC simply declined to test any of the material in the warehouse because the vials were, quote, not directly labeled as select agent. Okay, so you have a possible anthrax Ebola just kind of resting on the shelf that nobody can identify because no one's labeled it and we don't know. Does that make sense to anybody? Does it sound like, I mean, I gotta admit, maybe it sounds like the kind of incompetence we're dealing with today, but the reality is we're not supposed to believe that they would just take an unknown substance and just keep it somewhere for no reason and never find out what it was. Either they're lying about testing it, don't want us to know what it is, or there's another, or that none of this is even happening the way they're claiming. Am I crazy? This is insane to me that this is even something that they would claim. Just decline to test it because nobody labeled it. So yeah, just throw that possibly bowl in the trash because we're not sure. Or I guess you could say they incinerated it, but there's still a level of concern if you don't know what it is. I mean, are you just suggesting that you just went like full BSL-4 and everything just to burn substances you're not sure about? I guess maybe that would be the only one that would make somewhat sense, but the fact that, why wouldn't they just tell you that? You know, there's something off about this. In 2024, a civil lawsuit filed against the city of Reedley, Zhu played down the situation, saying that the warehouse was only being used for storage while his company waited for a new facility in Fresno. So again, his company, right? So he's built somehow still very rich and influential, or at least making companies, even though we had to pay out $30 million, if that even happened, by the way. And what he's saying here is he said, I was just using that for storage. Now, consider that being possible. What if this person is ultimately being used and wasn't even aware of what they were using the location for, and he was using it for storage for these companies he was doing, but he was also involved with corrupt, illegal companies and, criminal activity. So maybe, it seems like that either one of those could make sense, where this is a guy who was simply being used for the obvious point of his nationality and the cover, in the sense of it were be caught, it's obvious where they would aim this, or he was involved. And this is him lying about that. It isn't known how many biolabs are operating in the United States because there's no monitoring system in place, said Sam Howell, an associate fellow with the Technology and National Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. So we want to walk that through. I mean, let's make sense of that there's no system in place to monitor for biolabs after everything we've been through, after the fact that despite what we know, they're still doing gain of function. Let's not forget. In fact, they should have grabbed that. That's actually really important for this conversation. Oh, that's the wrong one. I don't even know what it's called now. Remember off the top of my head. Because the point is, Donald Trump and his administration have become the leaders in the world, they claim, of the safe or the good, good versions of gain of function. That's the truth. For those that probably don't want to believe that, you're probably denied if I don't grab the article, but let me just see if I can find it real quick. We went, and the point was just like with the lie of the COVID shots and the lie of, everything they seem to do. We're stopping the COVID, and except you're not. We'll get to that in a second, where you're quite literally still recommending them right now, where you're quite literally still making them for 2026 right now from Trump's administration. It's insane, guys. The point, though, let's see. No, that's an old one. Is that Donald Trump's administration claimed they were stopping gain of function, but he read the documentation. It said very clearly that we were going to stop all the dangerous ones, but be the world's leader in the ones that aren't dangerous. But that's a game. Gain of function is the problem, not the certain picked ones they like. That's frustrating. In the chat, if you guys remember what show that was, I can't seem to remember. I don't think it was in 2025. I think it was, maybe it was. Anyway. I'll try. If you guys remember what it was, put it in the chat and I'll include it in the show notes. That's frustrating. What was that show called? Anyway, back to the article. So we don't have any way to monitor. Well, obviously what we're talking about here would be like unknown secret biolabs. But what point is that there's plenty of these things that operate and no one's even trying to monitor them. How does that make sense? I don't know. A day after the Las Vegas raid in January, the case once again returned to Central California, where the FBI executed a search warrant on the warehouse. Reedley City Manager Nicole Zaiba said during the news conference in February. Zaiba assured the public that all biological materials were removed from the site years ago, and only pallets of COVID-19 tests, pregnancy tests, and boxes of paperwork remain. Ultimately, Zaiba said officials in Reedley were, quote, not surprised there was a Vegas connection. Really? For 2 years, Harper had warned federal agents that there could be additional materials in the home in Las Vegas based on details she learned during the investigation in Reedley. I couldn't get them to move on it, she said. The attitude really has been, well, we caught the guy. We did our part. So do you sense the same thing I do in this entire thing? Come to your own conclusions about it. But with everything we just saw, and even what she just said right there, we couldn't, she's literally going, guys, there's still dangerous things in there. And they go, we got him. It feels very October 7th of the Israeli government going, stop telling us about the drills or we're going to put you in jail. Don't point at that anymore, right? I just think that's wild. So we'll keep an eye on this if anything continues to develop. Oh, here, maybe she grabbed the right article. Let's see. Oops, hold on. That wasn't. Let's see. Oh, this is the one because I wanted you guys to check this out. Oh, no. That's just the one. Oh, you're just posting that in the chat for them. I see. Thank you for that. Yeah. So if you happen to find the one in the chat, guys, about the one I'm talking about, the Donald Trump's administration essentially becoming the leaders in gain of function, and when they kind of lied about that, I'd like to talk about that too. Make sure we're done, right? Yeah. Okay. So, just to refresh as well, I'll include this, which is what was posted from Las Vegas locally. The federal judge in Nevada has ordered the release of Ori Solomon, the property manager connected to the suspected Las Vegas biolab, which is not suspected, right? Especially now. But as far as I can tell, these people have never actually gotten charged. I just find that to be quite insane, especially with where we are in the world right now, with all the concern and people growing awareness of what Israel is doing around the world. But it shouldn't just be Israel. I'm just as concerned about this stuff. If it's a foreign anything doing like something like this in the country concerns me. But it obviously should matter more when we can see what the Israeli government is telling you they're capable of. Committing genocide, literally bombing schools and nurseries and hospitals and conducting dangerous operations, bombing, booby-trapping electronics. It's not a secret. These aren't even opinions. It's provable. So that necessarily matters when you're talking about whether one might be more dangerous in the regard of like the government involved. I'll also include the article from February 6th. Federal judge ordered the release of, and again, as far as I left out, I think that's where it is, of Ori Solomon. Solomon, who was originally from Israel, is in the country on a non-immigration visa.